So you may have been thinking in that previous section, hang on, if the atrium contracts, can't the blood just go back into the vena cava? Like, why does it go into the ventricle? That is an excellent question. Thank you for asking. So in this section, we're going to explain that. What happens is that there are valves preventing blood from flowing backwards. And for those of you thinking, yeah, but why doesn't it go this way? Yeah, veins have valves in them, even the vena cava. So there are valves inside the vena cava to say, don't go back that way, blood. So the blood has to keep moving forward. It's one of the really cool parts of our whole circulatory system. So both atria fill up at the same time. They contract at the same time. That contraction, I want my gift to go again. That contraction opens these valves, and then both ventricles contract together, which opens these valves, okay? The valves between the atria and the ventricles are cleverly called the atrioventricular valves. Now, we couldn't call it intra-atrial, could we? Because that would mean between the atria. We couldn't call it intraventricular because that would mean between the ventricles. This is between an atrium and a ventricle. So we use the word-o-word construction to make this word form. Atrioventricular, okay? And there's a right and left atrioventricular valve, here and here. So one between the right atrium and ventricle, one between the left atrium and ventricle. Now, the right is also called the tricuspid valve because it is in 3 parts. The left is called the bicuspid valve because it is in 2 parts. For those of you who are wondering, you know what, how am I going to remember this? I'm going to get this mixed up. Just remember that you are wearing a jersey, like a football jersey or a baseball jersey, with the number 32 on it. The 3 is over the right side of your heart and your right lung. The 2 is over the left side of your heart and your left lung. The 3 is for the tricuspid valve and the 3 lobes of the lung on the right. The 2 is for the bicuspid valve and the 2 lobes of the lung on the left. You're welcome. I didn't think of it simply. This is a view, if we did a transverse section, kind of an oblique section through the heart, so that we can look at the shape of the valve. So here's the right AV valve, tricuspid, bicuspid. Now, if you're like me, you're looking over here and going, why aren't these 2 called tricuspid valves? Because they're not, okay? They're called semilunar valves. Just get over it. You'll see in a minute. Okay, now the left AV valve over here, the bicuspid, is also called the mitral valve. A mitre is a place where 2 angled things come together. This is a mitred corner, and this, the hat that the Pope wears that has 2 angled sides, is called a mitre. So you do need to know all of the names for all of the valves in the heart. So the right atrioventricular valve, sometimes called the AV valve, but you will not use AV, you will spell out atrioventricular, is also called the tricuspid valve. The left atrioventricular valve is called the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. Good? All right. The atrioventricular valves and the mitral valves are very easy to distinguish from each other in a heart, a real heart or a heart model, because the atrioventricular valves are connected by these little tendinous strands to these muscle extensions inside the ventricles. These cords are called the chordae tendineae. They're literally tendinous cords. And these little dome-shaped muscles are called papillary muscles. Do you remember what papilla means? That's right, it means nipple-shaped. So these are little nipple-shaped muscles. I told you the word would keep coming up. We're not even done with it yet. The cool thing about these is there are 2 things. One is that when the ventricle contracts, these chordae tendineae prevent this valve from flipping up into the atrium. Okay, it allows it to close but not keep going. The other thing is that when the ventricle relaxes, remember the ventricle relaxes at the same time that the atria is contracting. The atrium contracts, that pressure forces the blood through this valve, And the ventricle relaxes, which pulls this wall out. Okay, this wall pushes in when the ventricle contracts, it pulls out when the ventricle relaxes. That pulls these papillary muscles away from the valve and actually helps to open the valve. Kind of cool, right? Just remember, hey girl, you're pulling on my chordae tendineae and it hurts so good. I have no idea why all of these are Ryan Gosling. I don't actually really like Ryan Gosling, but I don't know, all of these memes had Ryan Gosling. Okay, so the contraction of the ventricles then helps to close the AV valves and forces the semilunar valves open. So the blood pushes up, and as it pushes up against the AV valve, closing it, and it pushes up against the semilunar valve, forcing it open. The semilunar valves are called semilunar valves because of the shape they have in cross-section. See how it looks like kind of half a moon? Did this? Yeah, I know that one does too. I told you I didn't name them, okay? All right, so we have the AV valves, tricuspid, bicuspid, and you can see how they look kind of softer and squishier. They are definitely softer and squishier. And when you, if you, for those of you who are doing this, dissect the heart, you will definitely see the difference. It's very clear. The semilunar valves both have 3 parts, and these are much tougher and much stiffer. Okay? All right, so the semilunar valves don't have chordae tendineae. The reason that they don't flop back in toward the ventricle is that this cup shape is A, really tough, and B, as the ventricle relaxes and the pressure inside the ventricle decreases, blood actually does flow back from the pulmonary trunk and the aorta back into the ventricles. As it does that, some of it catches in these cups and pushes them closed. Okay? So the structure of the heart and the valves works together to open the valves when they're needed and close the valves when they're not needed. It's kind of cool. Okay, so here's again section through the heart, coronally and transverse. So when the ventricles are contracted, the AV valves are pushed closed and the semilunar valves are pushed open. Okay, and you can see the little bits of valve there that were pushed open. When the ventricles are relaxed, the AV valves are open and the blood flows back, fills up those cups in the semilunar valves, and closes the semilunar valves. Okay, so if you want to see what your heart looks like when it's beating, it goes like this. That just amuses the heck out of me. Okay, let me go back to the names of these semilunar valves. The one that goes to the aorta is the aortic semilunar valve. Aortic, meaning adjective form of aorta. Pulmonary semilunar valve goes to the pulmonary trunk. Okay. Some people leave off semilunar when they write the names of these valves, so they'll just say aortic valve or pulmonary valve, and that's okay, but I prefer that you write the whole thing. I won't take off points on a test, but I like to write the whole thing so I remember which is which. Okay, now, one more thing. I did say lub-dub when I was showing you that heartbeat. Those are the technical terms for the sound your heart makes, and the sound it makes is actually the closing of the valves. The lub is the sound of the atrioventricular valves closing. The dub is the sound of the semilunar valves closing. The valves themselves are cleverly located right behind this nice strong bone that protects your heart, the sternum. So when your doctor listens for the sound of the valves, they move the stethoscope around to the places where you can best hear the sounds of each valve. And those are your heart valves.